What's up, guys? And we're back for another episode of the Justin Caviar Show. My guest today is a very special guest and a very important guest, especially because you guys know that we've been talking to a lot of healthcare and medical professionals and scientists, PhDs, MDs, etc. My guest today is someone that I wanted to talk to. I discovered her from one of my good buddies, Dom D'Agostino, and then did a deep dive and looked at her on YouTube and all her other social media platforms, and very informative. She's a medical doctor, and we're going to dive into some very, very interesting stuff. All right. So, Gabrielle, welcome to the show.
Hey, Justin, with the last name of Caviar, how could anyone ever say no?
Well, I appreciate that. So, I'm happy for you to be on the show. Tell people that don't know who you are, that have never heard of you before. Tell people a little bit what you do, your background, and then we'll go from there.
Certainly. So obviously my name is Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, and I'm a physician. I have a concierge medical practice that services patients worldwide. But what's more important is that I founded the Institute for Muscle Centric-Medicine. And it's this concept that muscle, actually skeletal muscle, is the largest organ in the body. That's right. It's an endocrine organ and really interfaces everything about health and wellness as we know it. However, it is completely underrepresented in the medical field. My background is somewhat of an interesting one, and one that didn't change its course, which I think that for many professionals, that's interesting. I got my undergraduate degree in human nutrition, vitamin, mineral metabolism, and have been fortunate enough to train under the guidance of Dr. Donald Layman, which for people who are interested in the protein world, he is one of the foremost leading experts. And we've had a 20-year mentorship and friendship. So my perspective is unique and certainly muscle-centric and protein-forward. And then, of course, medical school, residency, and then a fellowship in nutritional sciences, geriatrics, and obesity medicine at WashU.
Wow, that's amazing. So let's just get right down into the deep science. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you've seen in practicing and discussing with your mentor?
That's a really good question. And there's quite a few. I would say globally, we have this conversation about nutrition that is really steeped in emotion. And that emotion skews the science, which is quite fascinating because it's a reemergence of what happened 80 years ago when World War II was abound. This idea that animal protein and plant protein are at odds with one another and that we are eating too much animal protein. None of this is true. So this, at a core fundamental level, is a problem. Hold on, I'm going to stop for 1 second. Did you hear this battery went out? Can you hear that on your end?
You sound good.
Okay. It's very distracting and loud. Okay. Hopefully they can edit that.
No worries. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, it's super loud. Do we have a second? Can I change this bed?
Yeah.
Actually, forget it. It's okay.
You sure?
So I'll go back. One of the core fundamental differences and issues that we're seeing is that we have this never-ending debate in nutritional sciences. And that is this emergence that we're seeing is no longer just science. And this really goes down to protein, arguably all macronutrients, but really this emergence of protein and the at odds of animal versus plant. This is a reemergence of what has been happening that we saw in World War II. 80 years later, it's kind of circling back, this idea that we are eating too much protein. And then there is this push to go more plant-based. That is probably one of the most detrimental things that an individual could do, and detrimental that we're seeing in aging. And again, this is very controversial because we have a lot of longevity experts that are talking about how one would reduce their protein because that's important for longevity. And I would argue one would have to ask, what is longevity defined as? And for myself, I'm a trained geriatrician from WashU in St. Louis, and I will tell you that the end of life is ugly. And how you get there is going to mean everything.
Yeah. I mean, is higher consumption of protein equal shorter lifespan? Even though you might have a better vitality, you might feel better until you die. It
I,
does it act? Is there like is the science? Is it baked into the science that higher consumption of protein in general leads to a shorter life?
I don't think that we could say that, but I do believe that that's what's being said in the
Mm,
industry, largely from animal data. And as we know, animal data doesn't necessarily translate at all to human, but it does set us up to be able to do randomized controlled trials to actually answer those questions. And arguably, when we say shortened lifespan, what is that defined as? Is that 6 days?
mm,
There's no definition. And there's also no definition of longevity.
right.
These very nebulous terms, I believe, are being leveraged to impact and affect the consumer. And when that happens, we must ask who profits? Why is
Mm,
there this discussion? Who is it serving? Because it is definitely not serving the consumer.
right.
And
Yeah.
the science supports higher protein above zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram in every randomized control trial. 0.1 gram per pound, 1 gram per kilogram will beat out zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram on every single trial.
Mm,
Yet when we look at the RDA, which is the recommended dietary allowance, that's the bare minimum. So it is set at a minimum number.
right.
And let me explain one thing further. The way in which we look at nutrition is so skewed, and the way in which we look at protein, which protein is the elephant in the room, is even more skewed. Take, for example, the micronutrient vitamin C. Justin, when you're not feeling well, do you look at the back of a label and go, oh, this has 60 milligrams of vitamin C. I've met my limit. Do you say that?
No, not at
You
all.
don't say that. You go, oh man, I am not feeling well. I maybe, I feel like I need extra vitamin C, correct?
Exactly.
So you would agree that the recommended dietary allowance for vitamin C set at 60 milligrams of vitamin C would be too low for you. And
Of
you would
course.
easily take more, correct?
Well, I think
Why?
I'm kind of that type of person anyway. When I see the back of the daily value, I go, yeah, that's for normal people. And I usually, this is not medical advice, but I usually take double the amount. I'm also a big person. So I'm 6'3", uh, 2, 230, 225,
You
230.
are a big
So,
human.
so I'm not a small person. So when I
But
read the back of
okay.
supplements, I go, okay, cool story, but that's for normal people.
All right. Let's take this one step further. How many people look at the RDA for protein and go, "Oh, that's my maximum." Everybody.
Mm,
And that's what's being pushed in the narrative right now. This is a
yeah.
problem. And actually this problem is decades, centuries old. So I'm
Mm,
writing a book right now and I'm going back through the history of protein, and something happened in the 1800s where it is the only science that is emotion filled. Physics doesn't have emotion. Chemistry doesn't have emotion. But all of a sudden
mm,
you get to nutrition and you have policy, you have physiology, you have scientific biases. The scientists are biased and are having their own emotion. So the people that we count on to give us good information are not necessarily objective.
mm.
And that's highly unusual. So you asked me what are
Yeah.
some of the biggest misconceptions? Some of the biggest misconceptions is certainly surrounding protein and the way in which we view it, the way in which we understand the minimum amount versus the amount for optimal health, the way in which we understand what is important to longevity, which I think we should throw that word out the window. It really is about quality of life. And then the fourth thing, or maybe I'm at the fifth thing, is understanding the quality of evidence
Mm,
and the evidence that supports optimizing for protein in nearly all domains of health: cardiovascular, Alzheimer's, diabetes, hypertension, randomized control trials that use humans.
right.
It's important versus
So staying
animal
on,
data or low
right.
quality epidemiology observational studies.
Right. So staying on the topic of protein, would you say that it's a little bit of a skewed system? Because to do a true study, you would have to take multiple people over their entire lifetime and they would have to each eat individual diets. Like, let's say, for instance, you're a vegetarian versus a carnivore versus someone that eats,
Yeah.
high carb, white, starchy, fast digesting carbs instead of slow
Yeah.
digesting carbs. When people say that, for instance, I know we're talking about protein. So protein can come from a multi different fasted source, but let's just
Yeah.
say with meat in general, right? People say, oh, eating meat causes cancer and all these different things, right? It might, but
Wait. By what mechanism of action?
right. But this is
Do you
what
see? But like, by what
right,
mechanism of action?
I understand, but this is what they're saying, right? So I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying this is what they're saying. So my point of saying that is when someone says that, for instance, meat causes cancer, right? How can they really say that's the fact unless they took a large group of people and they only ate meat their entire life?
Yeah, you cannot.
Because when you're eating meat only, your meat is one thing that has a byproduct and result of what you're ingesting. But those people that are eating meat, they're also eating sugar. They're also eating carbohydrates. And a lot of these companies have paid off scientists to say that meat is the problem. Meanwhile, probably the problem is sugar, fast digesting carbohydrates instead of slow digesting carbohydrates. So
yes,
would you agree that it's kind of almost impossible to do real scientific studies to really say that one thing causes one thing, because a lot of people are eating a wide range of different types of foods?
I think the question that you're posing is, can we equate large population-based studies to identify a single cause as it relates to nutrition? And that answer would be no. And the reason that answer is no is because nutritional epidemiology is flawed in exactly the same way. You cannot isolate habits. You also cannot identify exactly what people are eating. Are they smoking? Are they drinking? Do they live in a highly polluted area? It is incredibly difficult. That being said, you certainly can do randomized control trials to look at the impacts of food, look at the impacts of micronutrients and macronutrients. However, one question we should ask is, should we? And the answer is food is in a matrix system. You alluded to that before. For example, when you eat red meat, you're also getting creatine and you're also getting B vitamins, zinc, selenium. We are not eating in isolation. And that's the reality.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the one thing that when anyone comes up with, oh, this does this or this does that, do you really know that? Because the only way to really know that is to isolate these people for 100 years and say, okay, for your entire life, you're going to eat meat, no sugar, no sodas.
Yeah.
Also, is there something to be said that once someone decides, let's say they want to become a vegan or vegetarian, and they think that they're living whether this is true or not, it's irrelevant, but they think in their mind that it is a healthier diet. Is it even fair to say that when you start eating healthy, you start exercising more, you start limiting other things?
Absolutely.
And so the whole point of what I'm saying is it's kind of hard for anyone to point the finger and say this does this and this does that. They can have speculation, but they can't really say that.
I believe that that is true. I also believe that there are nutritional facts that we do know. We do know that optimizing for protein protects skeletal muscle mass. We know that skeletal muscle mass declines as we age. The tissue actually changes. Skeletal muscle becomes more anabolically resistant, meaning it becomes more difficult to trigger the needs of muscle. So the efficiency of protein goes down for skeletal muscle. And just taking a step back, older people have trouble putting on muscle. Older people have trouble keeping muscle.
Yep.
These are things that we've seen, not only that I have seen clinically, but we also do see this in the literature. Making good macronutrient recommendations to support health in this way is validated and can be done and is not in isolation. It truly is looking at the diet as a whole. And from my perspective, is optimizing for protein first. That's not to say that an individual cannot get away from doing a variety of different diets. There's many ways to eat. There is many ways to be incredibly flexible, which I think is very beneficial. However, one question we must always ask is, what is optimal for that person at that time, at that decade?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is it also safe to say that depending on the source of the protein, let's say we'll stick with meat, whether you're eating a grass-fed cow versus a corn-fed cow, even though
Yep.
protein is not protein. Like you can't say that protein is protein. Each source of protein depends drastically, right? Like if you're getting your protein from pea protein versus a grass-fed cow, would you say that the amino acids are different?
So that's drastically different. There would not be a huge difference from a grass-fed versus a conventionally raised cattle. In fact, most
Mm-hmm.
cattle is raised on pasture. All.
Mm-hmm.
2/3 of its life, it's raised on pasture, whether it's conventional or grass-fed. And then corn-fed cattle go to a finishing lot and typically eat corn at that time.
Right.
But the protein intake, the protein composition of that meat isn't necessarily drastically different. Corn-fed is typically fattier, but
Yep.
pea protein, that is low in the essential amino acids. There are 20 amino acids. There are 9 essential. The 9 essential, the body cannot make. We must rely on getting it from the diet. And of those 9 essentials, we have the branched chain amino acids. And this is
Mm-hmm.
actually some of the salient work that Dr. Donald Lehman has done, who, again, has been my mentor for over 2 decades. And what he discovered was that it's not just about protein. We do, as humans, have individual amino acid needs that are threshold requirements. For example, and the one that is most important in this area is leucine.
Mm-hmm.
Leucine is an essential amino acid that is very low in peas, but is very high in any animal-based protein. Getting this amino acid at a certain threshold, meaning a certain amount, between 30 and 50 grams of protein per one time, because you raise that amino acid in the blood to be able to trigger this muscle protein synthesis response that is very important, really, in my mind, is one of the defining qualities of protein. You could get your protein from pea. You could get 100 grams of pea protein and you could get 100 grams of animal-based protein, but the body, based on those amino acid profiles for pea, might register 35% less. So essentially, you would be getting 70%.
Right. No, it's a good
a
point.
pea-based.
It's a good point because a lot of people, they can say, "Oh, well, I'm not eating animals. I'm not eating meat, red meat or whatever. But I'm taking in a lot of, plant-based protein, but it's not the same. Protein's
Not the
not
same.
protein." Exactly.
No.
So if somebody was a vegetarian or a vegan and they wanted to take like an EAA supplement, they're taking pea proteins, but okay, well, I'm not going to eat meat, but I do think that there's some good science behind amino acids. I'll just take like a high reputable brand of EAAs. Would that be the same thing?
So it would increase the quality of the protein essential. So if they're taking an EAA supplement, that's an essential amino acid supplement.
Mm-hmm.
If you take, that would totally work. Just make sure that they're getting at least 2.5 grams of leucine in, you really want it in a 2 to 1 to 1 ratio. An essential amino acid supplement should be in the correct ratios. And then you could add that to that lower protein meal or plant-based meal, and that would absolutely increase the protein quality.
Right.
Of course, that doesn't address the micronutrients and the other nutrients like creatine and B vitamins and zinc and iron, but it certainly addresses the protein issue.
Right. Well, you could also take a creatine supplement. Like I take creatine. I take about 5 to 10 grams a day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. On top of eating meat.
But an individual doesn't have to be a primary meat eater. We just have to have transparent conversations. If we all collectively want a healthy world, then we have to have transparent conversations. And that's actually what is not happening.
Of course, yeah.
I personally,
biasness and stuff.
I don't care if someone eats meat or not. I don't care if someone is vegan or vegetarian or not. What I care about is that people have freedom to choose based on transparent information.
Mm-hmm.
So they feel that they are making a right choice for themselves based on good scientific data. That's what I care
Right.
about.
Right. I kind of know what you're going to say to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. A lot of people that are for eating meat over plants, they say that plants release, these toxins, and by eating plants, if you're on an all plant diet, a lot of people think that that is, traditionally when you think of health, right? Not to say that this is
Mm-hmm.
correct, but traditionally, especially in America, I don't know how it is overseas, that you see someone with a bowl of salad, right? And a
Yeah.
bunch of grass, a bunch of different types of salad, whatever, romaine, iceberg, and then, broccoli and all the different things, right? But there's some there's a lot of research saying how plants, when you eat plants, they have a defense mechanism, release these toxins, and actually eating plants might not be the best thing for you. Obviously, you're an advocate for eating meat, so I kind of think I know what you're going to say. But what would you say to someone that is, well, I'm eating meat, but I want to incorporate some vegetables to get the micronutrients in there, but I'm scared about the toxin release of plants. What would you say about that?
I am absolutely for eating plants. I think that we need the
Mm-hmm.
phytonutrients. I think that there's very good data to support fiber. I think that we evolved to eat them. I am not anti plants at all. In fact, I think that they're an essential part. Um, I wouldn't worry about it. I think that it's not detrimental.
Right. But is there any release in toxins when you're eating plants as a defense
I mean,
mechanism?
I I'm not. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if I know that that has any clinical significance on a human.
Gotcha. Okay. And also back to the geriatric community, and
Yeah.
as people get older, keeping on skeletal muscle.
Hmm.
A lot of people, they end up dying because they fall.
Yeah.
Like my grandma died because she fell, and then that was it.
That was it.
Um, so I think it's really important that someone does keep on skeletal muscle, especially as they get older, or at least try to preserve your muscle from your youth to your middle age to the elderly age. I think it is important, and you would say that the only way to actually do that, besides getting on like hormone replacement, is to eat like a wide variety and a high consumption of protein.
Especially as you age, your protein need goes up. Not
Mm,
only does the protein need go up, but you must do resistance training. And this is really, really important because these issues with sarcopenia that we've defined as later in life actually begin in your 30s. We are largely domesticated. We are not moving nearly as much as we used to.
hmm
And there is lipotoxicity that happens within skeletal muscle, meaning your muscle looks like a marbled steak. And that doesn't happen when you get older. That begins much earlier. And really addressing and understanding that skeletal muscle is an organ and implementing strategies to maintain its health when you are younger is everything.
Yeah.
I was looking at some of the data from the 1940s and we were so much more active. Do you know what the average height, do you know what the average weight of a man was in the 40s?
A
Guess.
lot less than now. I would
Just
say,
take a guess. It's going to blow your
okay,
mind.
160.
143 pounds.
Those are
The
small people.
average female is 121 pounds. These current dietary recommendations, that were made then have transferred to us now.
hmm
So these are what some of the early RDAs were made up of. Okay. And guess what their calorie consumption was? It's going to blow your mind. This is what was rationed. And when you think about rationing, that's a time of starvation
hmm
because all efforts were going to the war. Guess what the rationed calorie consumption was?
1,000.
3,000 calories.
Wow.
Why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because do you know how much they used to move? They were what they were defined as in terms of moving. It was 4 to 6 hours of moving around a day and 2 hours of
Mm.
walking.
Weren't people smaller back then, though? They were much
But
smaller.
why? But why were they smaller?
Growth hormone.
But I mean, that's in 1940s. So that's what, 80 years ago. I mean,
hmm
again, this is thinking back to, these drastic changes that we've made in nutrition and aging
Right.
and all of that stuff.
I know for a fact there's no way that I could get down to, if I got down to 145, I would be on death's door.
You were not built for that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to think that, how drastically the recommendations ebb and flow.
Right.
But, and then back to your point, not to get off topic here, but the reason I had brought that up is because the amount of activity we talked about, how could we protect your grandma, or how could we protect somebody else's grandmother of the listener?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The way in which is definitely understanding that we must move more now. Mm-hmm. We must be much more aware of our protein intake now because we are domesticated. The way in which you protect your tissue is you train it, but you also protect it through these amino acids, through dietary protein. It's the most important thing that an individual listening to this podcast could do, is to really understand that plant and animal proteins are different, that you can get a bit away with both, but you must account for the differences and you must optimize for protein. Right now, the recommendations are still based on archaic, crude numbers. We've really missed the mark. Right now, the recommendations are really driven by nitrogen balance studies. Nitrogen balance studies are really extrapolated data that they had used in animal husbandry on what could use to grow livestock. Mm-hmm. The way in which they grew livestock in an economical way was they optimized for carbohydrates because it's cheap, and they put the lowest amount of protein that would still promote growth so that they could have feed that was cheap. They extrapolated this data and put it to the soldiers, which you already know were 140 pounds and they were 25 years old. And then they carried that recommendation to now. There's been very little change. They've carried extrapolated data that they got from pigs to now to understand that the protein needs were based on nitrogen balance studies, which are just a crude measurement of growth.
Yeah.
But what we know now, which is not reflected in the data, which is not reflected in the recommendations, because recommendations are not just science, they're policy. The dietary guidelines are not science-based recommendations. They are based on policy to be able to provide general and global recommendations for everybody to meet. Mm-hmm. But what we know now is that each individual amino acid has a requirement, and we've completely overlooked that. And once that, if in fact that ever makes it into the recommended amounts, it will change the conversation. I'm not sure it ever will because of the politics, but if it did.
Okay. Well, we understand that most of the stuff that's out in the mainstream is BS anyway, right? A lot of people that listen to this show, they're biohackers. They're doing more than just eating perfect. They're also doing peptides and eating pig's brain, and they're doing crazy stuff.
Gross. So, pig's brain.
Yeah, it's called what is it? It's a cerebral something. It's extract from pig's brain. It's apparently it's like ridiculous for neurogenesis and growing glia cells and stuff. But I haven't tried it. But people take like dihexa and C-Max and stuff like that. But these are a lot of the people that listen to the show are biohackers, meta learners, trying to become Jason Bourne and Bradley Cooper from Limitless. So that's what most of these people are. So a lot of people that listen to the show know that a lot of the mainstream stuff that we hear in the tabloids is BS. But now that we've established that it is important to consume more meat, or just to consume more protein in general.
Just quality protein for neurotransmitters. You want to be optimized. You want to be biohacked. You have to nail this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, most of these people already do that in general, right? Like they're taking creatine, they're already doing that. They're looking for the next thing, right? Like Neuralink and stuff. So, but that's a whole different conversation than what we're talking about today. We understand that protein is important. The one thing that I want to talk about, and then we can move on to like actual like dietary practices, is with whey protein. Would you recommend, obviously there's whey concentrate, there's whey isolate, and also the problem that I have with whey protein, and then you can tell me how you feel about this. The problem that I have with whey protein is it has sucralose in it, Splenda, and all these have artificial sweeteners. Same thing with EAAs. It's very hard to find a brand that doesn't have sucralose in it. And the reason why I don't like sucralose is because it destroys the gut microbiome, your second brain. And it has dramatic effects on depleting the gut microbiome. So what would you say about buying whey protein or whey isolate protein And
So I think
what would you have to
whey
look out
protein
for?
is phenomenal. It has immunoglobulins in it.
Hmm.
It has bioactive substances that actually help with immunity.
Hmm.
I think whey protein is a highly bioavailable source. Whether you're going
Hmm.
to choose concentrate, if you're sensitive, you may choose isolate. But
Hmm.
I do think that whey protein is valuable. The company I work for a company called First Form. They have an unsweetened natural whey protein.
No sucralose.
Mm-mm.
Nice.
You know,
But a lot
yeah, I
of
think
99% of these companies, if you go to Vitamin Shop, they do have sucralose, which is the
yeah.
chemical name for Splenda. The people that, I don't drink Splenda or Equal or Sweeten well,
Mm-hmm.
you are with sucralose. They just don't tell you it's Splenda, but that's what Splenda is, sucralose. 99% of these companies, if you go to GNC or Vitamin Shop, have sucralose in it.
Mm.
So um, it sounds like a plug, but people should go definitely check out
Yeah,
the
check it
companies that
out.
you're affiliated with because you know you that's and
You can get
I
natural
think it's
ways.
unethical
There's
too. I think a lot of people they don't tell you that they go, oh, it's sugar free, but no one says that. Yeah, of course, whey protein is great for you, but sucralose isn't.
Justin, you're disciplined. We cannot ignore the fact that if it doesn't taste good, people don't want to eat it.
Hmm.
Me, I don't care. My husband,
Hmm.
he doesn't care. But
Right,
the mass majority of the population will not do something if it isn't
right.
to their liking,
Yeah, that's
which I
true.
actually think is a huge weakness, but
That's very true. Yeah,
that's
people
my
are weak.
opinion.
Yeah, that's true
Yes,
for sure.
this is also true.
Or you don't prioritize it. Either one or both, or maybe all of the above.
You know,
But
I'm not sure if you know much about my practice, about the patients that I take care of. Do you? I'm not sure if that. Um,
no, I looked at your practice prior to this interview, but I didn't
uh,
look at
yeah.
the people you're talking
Okay.
to.
So my husband is a Navy SEAL. I take care of special operations in my practice, CEOs, executives, and I will tell you that group, knowing your weakness. We were just talking about weaknesses.
Hmm.
Individuals who know their weaknesses are those that become exceptional at health. So all the biohackers, everyone, I'm sure you've got a ton of entrepreneurs listening.
Hmm.
When they identify their weaknesses and find that slippery slope, for example, increased modafinil use, increased stimulant use,
Hmm.
increased vice use, at that moment that is happening, that is the time to pay attention.
Hmm.
That's just a little side note.
Yeah, I definitely don't recommend anyone blasting amphetamines because there's a lot of drawbacks.
No, and of course, none of this is medical advice. I am just simply sharing that understanding your weaknesses make
Hmm.
a huge difference in extraordinary health and then extraordinary
Yep,
contribution.
absolutely. But it's safe to say that obviously it has to taste good for people to drink it. So you're better off drinking whey protein with sucralose in it versus not doing anything.
Exactly. I
Understood.
believe that is to be true. I think that that's true.
Yeah, so I do too. But for people that really want to get down and care about the gut microbiome, that are eating, handfuls of sauerkraut every day, like myself, that sucralose will destroy the
Impressive.
gut
That
micro.
is impressive.
Yeah, I think it tastes pretty good. I like fermented foods, but I'm also a weirdo. I like a lot of weird stuff. So yeah, I'm also the type of person that I don't eat for pleasure. I eat for performance, and
Mhm.
most people don't do that. Most people eat for pleasure. So definitely not normal when
This
it
is
comes to that
true.
realm.
This this is true. And if you can adjust for that, then
Mhm.
eh, you find yourself free of distraction, of
Yeah, that's a whole nother
feeding
topic, right?
distraction. Yep. But
Yeah.
whey protein, again, back to your point, I'd much rather have them have a shake that has sucralose in it versus something that doesn't, and
Hmm.
have, something sweet midday. Also, because of the immunoglobulins, it has alpha lactalbumin, transferrin. It has all kinds of um, amazing property. Not trans, yeah, amazing properties. Might not have transferrin, but it has alpha
Yep.
lactalbumin. Yeah.
So let's go into the nutrition and what people or what you think that the optimal nutrition plan would be. First, what did you eat today? Or did
Um,
you eat
I'm embarrassed to tell you. I don't want to tell you.
a honey bun?
No, I didn't. I had a I or like some kind of sausage, some kind of
Like chicken
local
sausage, like a
farm.
Trader Joe's, or okay,
No, no, no. There's a company called Bone In that is
nice.
local delivery. I had that. and an egg. And on my
Only one?
way to, well, I mean, I had like 4 sausages. Yeah.
No, only
And
one egg?
yeah, and 1 egg.
Oh, I eat a lot of eggs.
Yeah. Eggs are great. They're great. Choline, all that other stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Lutein. But anyway, and if I'm being transparent, I also had a Quest chocolate and almond thing with my daughter on the way to school.
Oh man, what is that? Is that a bar?
It's like
or?
it's like a whey chocolate, whey protein chocolate cup, almond butter cup.
Oh, okay.
Peanut butter cup, something like that.
Yeah.
Which I normally don't do.
Right. Because you got to watch out for the sucralose. I know Quest, they're heavy on the sucralose. No pun intended.
No, I normally don't eat that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay. So what would be the optimal diet for someone that wants to live a high quality life in general? Female and male. It might differ from gender.
Yeah, it doesn't differ from gender. It really differs from muscle mass. I think that's one thing that people do confuse. Protein is not sex specific, which is interesting because it really is about body weight. And for men or women, I believe personally, number one, that there's many ways to do it right. But in my clinical practice, and certainly the patients that I service, I recommend 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. So for example, I'm 115 pounds. I get 115 grams of protein. I can titrate up or titrate down depending on what my total calorie load is or what I'm doing. Understanding that distribution is important. Now, what does that mean? If you are looking for metabolic correction, if you are an entrepreneur or a biohacker who is looking to lose a little bit of weight, then those individuals, I actually recommend 3 meals. If you are looking to balance blood sugar, which for someone maybe who's listening to this is thinking 3 meals a day, that seems like a lot. It's not. And especially if it's in a restricted window, I think is more beneficial because it allows you to mitigate extra calories. But it does balance blood sugar, and a minimum of 30 to 50 grams of protein evenly distributed depending on your size. For a guy like you, Justin, that would be tricky.
Can you just back up a little bit from the mic? I don't want just back up a little bit from the mic. There you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Breathe in someone's ear.
Good. Is it too loud? I'd much rather sit back here.
No, you're good. Just like halfway from there to where you were before.
Okay.
Right there. Perfect. It's just when you talk directly into the mic, because you don't have a pop filter, it's just breathing right into it.
That sounds great.
You're good.
But here's all my fancy mics. Look at these.
I know you. Oh, the Shure SM7.
Got a couple of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway.
No, you're good. Just don't hover over it.
Yeah. Okay, great. It's much more comfortable. So the idea for metabolic correction, 3 meals a day helps balance blood sugar, especially if you're prioritizing protein. Now, if someone is just looking to maintain body weight, the first meal is the most important, optimizing for protein. And that meal should actually be, they really want to hit that, whether they are a man or a woman, 50 to 55 grams of protein. The first meal of the day, doesn't matter what time that is. It could be 11 o'clock. Why is that? I know you're wanting to know that. It's because you are in a catabolic state. You are coming up after an overnight fast. Your muscle, your skeletal muscle, your organ of longevity is primed for execution. And it is the most important meal. And actually, the data in the literature would indicate that most of the studies are done on that first meal. As it relates to muscle protein synthesis, as it relates to blood sugar regulation. And this is something that Don and I talk about quite frequently, is that first meal effect. Interestingly, if you are just looking to maintain that second meal, the lunch meal, or whatever that second meal is, doesn't actually have to be optimized for protein. Doesn't really matter. And then that last meal of the day before you're going into an overnight fast again is most valuable.
Does it matter what
Justin,
time?
you weigh what, 200 and how much do you weigh?
225 to 230.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got to be eating a lot. If we were to put that into 4, yeah.
You'd be surprised, but I'm going to tell you in a second.
Yep. But again, the more active you are, there's 2 ways to stimulate muscle. The more active you are, the less protein you will need to protect that tissue. And that seems a bit counterintuitive because there's protein turnover. But
Hmm.
again, if you're not necessarily in a hypertrophy phase, you're not looking, hypertrophy does require excess calories. It does require a certain amount of calories. But if an individual is just looking for that maintenance, then 1 gram per pound ideal body weight, thinking about distribution is important.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a mutant when it comes to that. So I usually eat once a day. So I look like a meathead gym rat, but I eat like
Yeah.
David Sinclair. Like I eat for longevity
Mm.
and brain performance, which is mostly keto. I fluctuate from ketogenic diet to paleo at the end. So I do implement carbs, but they're more slow carbs like legumes and stuff. But that's only to improve my sleep and my growth hormone release at nighttime. And I usually don't eat at least 4 to 5 hours prior to going to sleep because of that and for sleep benefits. But yeah, to be honest, I usually eat 1 to 2 meals a day, and it's usually a lot of eggs,
Mm.
steak, and legumes, and that's really it. I take a
So,
green shake, like a
mhm.
or super organic, disgusting green shake, and then I put creatine in there, and that's really it. I take nootropics and stuff, but as far as like actual, micronutrients and food, I'm eating mostly eggs and meat, and then I take the green shake.
So while you're young, as you are, you can get
Hmm.
away with it. 1 meal a day is probably not going to be optimal to protect your tissue over time. Not to say you couldn't use a shake or
Yeah.
some kind of essential amino acid or overall amino acid blend, but probably in the next 10 years, that may change from being an optimal strategy.
Well, I
Where you
take
may,
EAAs while I'm working out too.
okay,
Like during workout, I'll take high potency of EAAs.
okay.
So yeah, but the size, I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but I'm pretty big, pretty strong, bench 405. Like people are, oh, you must eat like crazy. I'm like, no, I don't. I think it's a lot of it's genetics because my
Mm.
dad's the same way.
Genetics definitely play a role.
Yeah,
And I
my
would
brother's
even
the same way
consider a
too.
full amino acid, not just the essential. I would
Yeah.
consider a full amino acid profile mix, not just the essentials, because the essential, you'll get about half of what is. So if it is saying that it's 10 grams of essential, you're getting 5 because the body will have to make the other non essentials.
Interesting. So if somebody wanted to get a full amino acid supplement, where would they go?
I mean, again, I recommend first form. Again, it's not unsweetened. The amino acids, the
Right.
full spectrum amino acids, they have flavors and all kinds of things.
Got you. It's
So if
called
someone
it's called
was
full form.
first form, yeah,
First form. First form. Okay.
yeah,
We'll put the description in the show
yeah. But
notes
if
below.
someone was looking for, they could just use whey protein, I suppose.
Hmm. Okay. And then, so what would you recommend that people are actually eating? Like eggs, steak,
Yes,
spinach? What's the
yes, all of
optimal?
it. All yes.
All of
So
it?
I think red meat is really important. I think that it is so nutrient dense that we cannot ignore it. It's a hugely bad rap, but it's very nutrient dense. I think eggs are phenomenal. They have lutein, they have choline, they have fat
Hmm.
soluble vitamins. They are a great source of protein. Eggs are probably one of my top go to foods. If you can stomach liver, we have it here. It's disgusting, but
Yeah.
it has a ton of fat soluble vitamins. Spinach is great. Any kind of greens are great. I also think anthocyanins, the purple berries, those kinds of colors, the reds, beets,
Mm.
anything brightly colored is important.
Does it matter how you cook them? Because I know,
It
like,
does, actually. Quite
okay.
frankly, it does. And um, things should not, it depends on the vegetable. It depends on, for example, carrot should be cut. A carrot should actually be cooked whole because it loses some of its beta carotene when you cut it and cook it.
Mm.
When you roast a carrot, it should not be roasted at high heat. It should only be roasted with fat because it allows for the uptake of the fat soluble vitamins, and it should be roasted whole. For spinach, I don't believe that any of the spinach or any of the vegetables should be boiled. We know that they lose nutrients. We know that if you flash cook them, it does liberate nutrients. Even berries, frozen berries that are then thawed actually have more antioxidant activity than a berry that's just fresh.
Yeah, well,
So
and
it
then
really
also
just
like
depends
different
on.
vegetables, like cooking and eating them raw. I know that cruciferous vegetables you want to eat raw mostly,
No,
and then
no, they're all raw vegetables, very difficult to get the nutrients out of.
got you. So you want to cook them in fat.
Yes, for fat soluble vitamins for increasing absorption, you want to cook in fat. Garlic, any kind of herb, you want to cut it and let it sit for 10 minutes because the enzymes together actually have medicinal property. It has allicin in it,
Hmm.
and that is one of the original performance enhancing foods.
Hmm.
So you want to cut garlic, let it sit
Right.
for 10 minutes prior to just cutting it and cooking it. So they're
Besides
very
amino,
specific
yeah,
things, yeah, that
yeah.
individuals can do. Hmm.
Besides amino acids and whey protein, what other supplements would you recommend that people take? Would you recommend a multivitamin or fish oil,
I do recommend a fish
krill
oil.
oil?
Um, so krill oil doesn't have a lot of EPAs in that, and I think that there's a lot of good data for EPA and DHEA. I think
Hmm.
fish oil, again, is really important. I tend to go high. Again, I'm not giving medical advice for myself and the patients in my practice. We're at a minimum of 4 grams of some kind of omega. I also think creatine is important. I do think a liposomal vitamin D is important. I think if individuals are undergoing stress, that any kind of adaptogenic herb, there are
Hmm.
multiple different kinds of adaptogenic herbs that I really, really like that have been used for a very long time. I'm not big on probiotics, but I do think prebiotics are very valuable, and those take the form of those reds and greens powders, blue powders. I use a full spectrum of colors. Those are
Hmm.
typically prebiotics. What else naturally do I recommend? I think those are the big ones. Yeah, those are the big ones. It's very
Okay.
individual, depends on the
Right.
person.
Right.
A multivitamin is great.
And what if somebody wants to go even deeper? They're doing everything perfect. They eat quote unquote
Yeah.
perfect. They exercise, they do sauna, they do cold plunge, they do
Hmm.
everything. They have low stress, but they still want to get better. Well, is there any cutting edge stuff that you're aware of that people, it might not be super popular, that actually works and has a lot of data backing it?
Yeah, I mean, now you're talking about more pharmaceuticals, which as a
Hmm.
physician, I use a whole host of them. Um, it depends, of course, on the person, but I believe in the interface between natural and Western.
Hmm.
There are neurotropic, brain enhancing medications. There are um, insulin supporting medications, right? Insulin sensitizing medications. I know
Hmm.
metformin is very controversial. I think that there's a lot of benefit depending on the individual. Semaglutide, which is a GLP-1 agonist. I think
Yep.
individuals who really struggle to lose weight, and if they are candidate, this can be extraordinarily beneficial. One of the other things that people overlook is they use a lot of wearables and they do not get tested for sleep apnea because they say their Whoop or their Aura says that they're sleeping well. Every single Navy SEAL I have in my practice, which is quite a few, every single athlete I have in my practice has sleep apnea. And it is not about being overweight, it is about the musculature of the neck.
Mm.
And that is something that I think we've become so accustomed to wearables that we've discounted the concept that proper testing is still important.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sleep apnea is definitely will ruin your sleep for sure.
But people don't even notice, and it can be subtle and it's over a period of time. And these are the people that it can sometimes be reflected in blood work where they
Hmm.
have an elevated hemoglobin or hematocrit and they're not on testosterone, or, they just have a very robust response, or difficulty losing weight, or challenges with blood pressure that they struggle to mitigate, or challenges with blood sugar that they are doing everything right, yet they're still having blood sugar issues and cortisol issues.
Mm. Interesting. How does somebody get tested for that? They would go to a sleep specialist, and then you'd have to do like a sleep
Everything
test.
is much more streamlined now. For example, patients in my practice, we use at home sleep kits
Mm.
that are able
Okay.
to tell the oxygenation by they get all strapped up. There's a device on their finger, and it looks at different kind of oxygenation, arterial flow.
That's awesome. And then if they
Yeah.
do have sleep apnea, do they get like a CPAP machine or modafinil?
Yeah. No, they probably get both. Um, they get a CPAP machine, or sometimes it's simply a mouth guard to reposition the jaw.
Hmm. Interesting. Do
It's
you think a lot of
important.
young people, a lot of like, young teenage kids deal with this, with a lot of the jaw lines
They
being
do.
more narrow and stuff? Because I talked to James Nestor, the guy that wrote the book Breathe, and he said that mouth breathing is underdeveloped the jawline and
Yeah,
the narrowing, and also the upper mouth area inside of the mouth. Do you think a lot of kids that are in high school and
I do.
college, they have sleep apnea, but they probably think they're so young, like they don't even know what it is?
I do. And I believe that it probably starts, you can see it in infancy.
Hmm.
Yes. Yes,
Why do you
I
think
do.
this isn't more mainstream of identifying this? Is there just too much stuff going on that people can't just crack down on each specific thing? Like we don't have the right systems in place?
You're asking me why I think that not more people are talking about it.
Yes, because I've only heard of sleep apnea in older people.
I think that the nature of medicine is reactive medicine, it's not proactive.
Hmm.
And that at a core fundamental premise is why it is not addressed. Because we are
Yeah.
not looking for root cause. We are typically waiting for a problem and then reacting to a problem.
Hmm.
And it's the way in which algorithmic medicine is taught. But my job is people come to me after they've seen 14 other doctors,
Right.
or they've come to me because they're done from a deployment, or they just took a new role as a CEO, or they are a CEO and they run 23 different companies.
Hmm.
They can't afford to feel badly. And they've been everywhere
Right.
else. So it is about finding why. Is the person in a sick building? Sometimes people haven't had their HVACs cleaned out, and every time they go into the building, they feel poorly, like your warehouse. That thing,
Hmm.
all the vents should be cleaned before you're going in there.
Yeah.
You're in
Yeah. Yeah. We
Florida,
did. Oh yeah,
you know?
we did. We did. Yeah.
So those kinds of things. It's really thinking about everything holistically. And when I say holistically, I don't mean naturally. I mean in a extraordinarily comprehensive way.
Right. And
Yeah.
what would you recommend for high performers to do today if they're not seeing you, but you might give them the 80-20, like, okay, here's 80% of your effort, or 80% of the role that involves 20% of your effort?
Yeah. Number one, really get your nutrition dialed in. Optimize protein forward, minimize carbohydrates earlier on in the day, minimize carbohydrates, understand it's a meal threshold that we didn't talk about. Number one, right? So you've got to get nutrition. You do have to, if you can, get sleep. High
Mm-hmm.
quality sleep. Everybody talks about it, but it's the time that the brain cleans itself. Number three would be know your battle rhythms. In an entrepreneur's life, in a biohacker's life, there are going to be ebbs and flows of pushes, of things that need to happen. Know when these battle rhythms are going to happen, adjust accordingly, right? And realize that if you are going to do a full push, that full push has a deadline. I have guys that go, okay, for the next 4 to 6 weeks, I have major projects coming up. I'm going to have little sleep. You have to adjust your nutrition appropriately. You have to do your training appropriately. But you also do have to be mindful of those battle rhythms. The fourth thing I would say is know your weaknesses. Every entrepreneur, every high performer, they 100% have to know their weaknesses and plan for it. You cannot be shocked. This isn't your first rodeo. You know that the habits are going to emerge, that you are going to do things that perhaps have less than ideal outcomes. You have to plan
Mm-hmm.
for it. It's not the first time you're going to do it. And if you plan for it and you mitigate it, then each time you become more efficient at executing and the extraordinary.
What are some of the biggest weaknesses you find with these high performers? Do you find like a correlation with the
Oh,
same
yeah.
problems?
Oh, yeah. All vice use, drinking,
Okay.
stimulants. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Always. Always
Have
something like that, or
Have you
some
found
kind
the
of,
perfect one, the perfect woman or man that is a top entrepreneur CEO and is perfect,
oh, yeah.
the most
Oh,
disciplined
yeah.
person in the world?
Oh, yeah. The ones in my practice are phenomenal. I mean,
Yeah.
they are some of the top entrepreneurs. And it's interesting. there are some at the top that are so disciplined. They are relentlessly disciplined. They do phenomenal. They push themselves hard, but they have behaviors in place that allow them to recover. Yes.
What are some of
Incredible.
the patterns you've seen from these top performers that I'm sure people listening to the show probably know these people?
Yep.
What are some of the correlations that you find that all top people have? Like, what is the one thing like differentiates them from someone that's, walking on the sidewalk, just an average Joe?
Obsessively focused. Obsessively focused.
With their business or just with their life in general?
I obviously deal with their health and wellness. They are obsessively focused. They'll be like, hey, okay, Dr. G, what about this? What about this? I'm like, okay, we're going to do this. Click. And they're done. They're on it. I need it right now. But they're obsessively focused and they're really good at executing.
Wow.
They are
Have you ever seen
focused.
Because sometimes I know a lot of successful people that they are super disciplined. And then I also know some people that are extremely smart and they're like extremely overweight and they're not disciplined at all, but they're just really smart at computers and they made a ton of money, but they're not disciplined in their whole life.
They have no self-discipline. They have external discipline, but no self-discipline.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just think that like some of the people that I'm talking to, obviously I'm not going to name their names, but these are top people that we know that are, they don't look like Chris Hemsworth or Chris Evans, but they're super wealthy, 100 millionaire plus, but they're just really obsessed with what they do. As an example, I know one guy that has a software company and he's obsessed with computers. He's been coding since he was basically born, and he was a super genius, incredibly high IQ. And he also he's on the spectrum. He has Asperger's, but we actually pride that because he's one of my good buddies and he's incredibly smart, but he's not fit. He doesn't go to the gym. He eats donuts, but he's also super rich.
Okay, so the question is that a high performer? Being super smart is one domain of performance,
right?
But ultimately think about how much more he could do if he was actually fit and healthy. Right? It's not about the short game. It's the long game.
And that's the thing that I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around is that even if he was incredibly fit, would he be better off? And
yes.
I don't know.
I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why. Part of my training was in geriatrics, right? I did this very rigorous fellowship at WashU, which is, top 3, right, in the country. And one of the things that my responsibility was, you do have to do research. Let me rephrase that. You get to do research. Midlife obesity is a absolute risk factor for dementia. Without a shadow of a doubt, there is no free lunch. If you are telling me this guy is overweight and rich and successful and will he be better off if he was fit, it absolutely will affect his brain at some point. Without a shadow of a doubt.
What about people that have the argument of by doing these things, it takes time away from them being on the computer?
It's foolish. You and I both know that's foolish.
I know, but it's a podcast, so I have to, I have to talk. I have to make it entertaining. So, yeah. Okay.
I mean, the question is what could he be if he was optimized in multiple domains? How good could he be? He could probably be even more phenomenal.
Yeah, probably.
Because I would say that the best entrepreneurs, like the killers out there, recognize that mental stamina is only one piece, that you have to have physical stamina.
That's interesting. And why at all these tech conferences, they always have donuts and pizza?
Flawed thinking.
It's crazy, right?
But can you imagine the tech guy that was just super alpha? He would dominate.
Yeah.
That guy, I want to know that guy.
Yeah. Well, hi, my name's Justin.
I want that guy in my practice. That's who I want in my practice.
Why do so many people that work out get the stereotype of being, not as intelligent and kind of meatheads? Because I will say that there's a lot of gym bros that are not smart. So,
can't be good at everything, my friend. Cannot be good at everything. But can you imagine the kind of culture we would have if it wasn't so dichotomous?
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting.
But don't you think that's kind of how life is, and the balance of it is because if the super genius were also super fit, there would be a giant gap between normal people, and then income inequality. You talk about someone that's there would be like extreme rich and then extreme poor, and the middle class would be kind of non-existent if there was just these super.
Yeah. But you know what, Justin? I think that it's cultivatable. I think that there's a
Right.
capacity of being able to cultivate and be globally strong. And that's incredible. This idea of being globally strong instead of kind of unidimensionally
Mhm.
capable. I look at my husband and I mean, he makes me feel like a real loser.
Well,
Guy
he's
is a
Navy SEAL,
Navy,
so
wait, hold on. A Navy SEAL of 10 years,
that's
just got an
incredible.
interview spot at Harvard. He's going to be a urologic surgeon, was a combat medic, has written like 5 papers, and he's in medical school. What a loser.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing.
But I mean,
Is he public or no? He's
what do you
private.
mean?
Like, is he out there?
No. I
No. Okay.
mean, yeah, not really. I mean,
Okay.
he doesn't, he did an interview with one of our best friends, Don Saladino. That was his second only public interview. And you know what he would tell you? He would say, I'm nothing special.
Hmm. Well, I
He
think it
says
depends on.
he would say
It's
it's
all
my
relevant, right?
habits. He would say it's my habits. It's my habits and my work ethic.
Right.
Meanwhile, he's way
But
smarter than the average person.
But yeah, but also I know some people that are super disciplined, but genetically are just not smart, and they're just a little bit above average. They're not outliers.
Yeah,
So I don't think just by having incredible habits will make
I
someone
agree
turn
with
into your
you.
husband. I think you have to
I
have like
agree
the
with you.
blueprint first. Yeah, you have to have the
I
structure.
agree with you. He's like, I'm
Yeah.
nothing special. Meanwhile, he's like built like a tank,
Yep.
right? All these things, although he can't find his socks to save his life or put away his dishes. No, I'm just kidding. But I agree with you. I do think that there is um, a core fundamental makeup, but I have to say it's very interesting to see what it actually takes and what a truly exceptional human does. Because, like I told you,
Hmm.
he makes me look like a slacker, and I'm a very hardworking person. I am a
Hmm.
fellowship trained physician. I did, multiple residencies and a fellowship. I have a full concierge practice, I have a
Hmm.
great book I'm writing. I have 2 little kids. And this guy is up at 4:30 in the morning, crushing it, working for a few hours before he even goes to
I
work,
love it.
comes back, and then works again. But anyway, I suppose that you asked me what is the thing. It's the ability to focus.
Hmm.
So, witnessing, and I think that is a cultivated skill to
Mm.
be able to mentally focus for long periods of time.
I think he has a good point though, is that like his obviously he has probably a much better framework and blueprint from starting off than the average Joe, right? But I think he has a good point that his discipline and his habits definitely give him the result that most humans desire of being incredibly fit, incredibly good looking, incredibly smart, all the things that most humans want, right? But how do you influence someone? Because you can't change someone until they want to change themselves. So how do we make that more of the role model versus if you go on TikTok and you see these role models,
Oh,
how do
so
how do we
bad.
how do we translate the community, not the scientific community because they're already on board, but the
Yeah,
mainstream community? How do we translate them to, for lack of a better word, uneducated content to educational content, like they do in China, where
I
they
know.
limit the content that you see. It's all about science and education and becoming a super intellectual. Versus here, it's girls twerking and people fighting on airplanes.
Um, Justin, I would love to know. I would love to know what we can do and why we are so deeply distracted and why, as a society, we crave distraction. It's
Mm.
almost as if the ability to go deep, the ability to have real conversations, the ability to do mentally challenging things is being taken away from our youth. It is very destructive, and it's very destructive to individuals' capacity. So, your friend who's really into coding is very fortunate in that way, um,
Yeah.
because he is able to get into deep focus. My husband is very capable. I am afraid that our youth is going to go the opposite. On the same hand, those that master this skill, it's going to be incredibly easy for them to succeed.
Oh yeah. 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 It's all on how you grow up in your environment and who your friends are. Cultivate your friends, cultivate your environment. I think that's definitely a big component, especially when raising a child. But yeah, these kids nowadays, man, I don't want to be the old guy, but and I'm not that old, and I'm not that old, but
No.
but yeah, some of these kids nowadays, like their priorities are so different. And someone like my brother is 17 and he's super disciplined. And he kind of looks up
Mm,
to me. Like, I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I don't do any of that stuff. He obviously doesn't. He doesn't want to do any of that, and he eats perfect. He's all about, right now he's learning Japanese, and
that's
he plays
incredible. That's what
guitar.
I
And
did in high school,
yeah.
Japanese. Hmm.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, he wants to go to, after he graduates high school, he wants to go to Tokyo and do
Incredible.
like a year internship, yeah, in college and stuff. But right now he's just focused on going to D1 school and getting the highest SAT score, ACT score that he can.
Incredible.
And but he's motivated by it. And I think there's a little bit of a genetic component, because I was like that and I didn't really have to work at it. I was just born
Mm,
like that. And then my dad's also like that, and my uncles are like that. So but I don't think everyone has that framework of being hyper obsessive with stuff. And in my family, we tend to get extremely obsessive with certain things. And my
that's
sister's the
lucky.
same way too. My sister's the same way. Yeah. Very interesting. I'm going to ask you some philosophical questions, and then we can end this thing.
This is my
Um,
favorite. I much prefer to talk philosophical than I do to talk science, but unfortunately, I
well, you're
never get
known
the
for that.
opportunity. Huh?
Hmm. I said you're known for medicine, so that's what
I
most people
know.
that
It's
want to
it's
talk
kind
to
of
you.
disappointing for
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
quite frankly.
Well, when you have your own podcast, it will be a lot easier because you could talk about whatever the hell you want.
That's right.
I don't know if are you gonna be like a Huberman Lab podcast where you're talking by yourself, or are you gonna have guests?
I'm gonna mostly do solo casts in the beginning, and then I'll have some guests.
Mhm. Solocast is hard. That's like you're like lecturing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a lot easier to have normal conversations like this for sure. But
Mm,
anyone that does a solo podcast, I give you three high fives. If I
okay.
had three arms, I'd give you three high fives. So I'm going to ask you some philosophical questions, and then we can get out of here. Um, what do you think we're here for? What is the meaning of life to you?
I think we are here to be extraordinary and reach our fullest potential,
Hmm.
truly, and really bring that forth to benefit other people. I
Right.
think we are here for service, but I think that service is through the exceptional reaching of our full potential. That's what
Hmm.
I think.
Do you ever think that all the success and all the rat race that, especially in America and corporate America, that eventually you're going to be dead, your company's going to be dead, and
Hmm.
you know we get distracted because maybe we're not smart enough, we don't have enough neurons in our brain to really
Hmm.
see past this realm. And what's your take on people that are so focused on earth things, but eventually
Yeah.
everything will die?
Well, I have a bit of a perspective on this because, again, I'm a trained geriatrician. And
Hmm.
for people who don't know what that is, that's end of life.
Yep.
So I have seen an extraordinary amount of death in my time, which I would say has affected me deeply. I personally think of end of life and death and after more so than perhaps the average person because what I've seen, and so does my husband, of
Hmm.
course, being having been gone to war. And I would say that I'm not sure how other people experience it, but I am very conscientious
Hmm.
and I work diligently at putting out information that I hope will change people's lives. And that's actually, quite frankly, one of the reasons, and my mentor will never be listening to this podcast, but one of the reasons that I am if you look at my YouTube, there's a whole host of videos that it's just myself and Don.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons is because I know how precious life is. And he's 70 in his 70s. I want to have those conversations for myself and for the public.
Hmm.
Um, and this book that I'm writing, which is quite a heavy lift, it's really about um, what I believe to be the truth of the science as we know it right now. I believe and I hope that it will change for the future. a legacy. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not for me, right? I am not doing all of this stuff for me. It's not about Gabrielle Lyon. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
But it is about the impact and the way in which we can show up for each other. And that probably didn't even answer your question, but
No, I
it
did.
is a driving force and something very much on my thought process. I also think that there are different levels to people, and some people are very self-focused. And I believe that as we grow up, if you are inclined, then you will believe that it's really not about you. It is really about others and service.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that comes from emotional intelligence.
Do you think it's important for humans to see death while they're still alive to appreciate
I
the current
do.
moment?
I do. I think that a lot of the arguments that we see in the space in health and nutrition um, are so amplified because people haven't seen or experienced death.
Yeah,
That's
I
why I
agree.
fight so hard for the people in the middle, because I've seen what the end looks like so many times. I mean, I worked at a nursing home. I Part of my job rounding was to see end of life. I mean, you know,
Mm-hmm.
if people walked those days with me, they would go, gosh, we really shouldn't be arguing about,
Right.
is plant
Yeah.
protein the same? We clearly
You
have to
think at
protect,
the end, yeah, we
we
always think
clearly
that
have
we
to
have so
protect
much
our
time.
tissue,
Yeah,
yeah.
we think we have so much time, and at the end, well, you probably have a better experience. I've only seen a couple people at hospice die, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
not crazy, man. I've seen two people. I saw uh, my girl's father die at hospice, and then also my grandmother. And just looking at the person after they're gone, it's like their soul
Yes.
is not there anymore. Like
Right.
it's a weird feeling that, and
Yeah.
it might be metaphysical, but there's something about seeing someone, even if they're asleep, versus when they're gone. It's like
Yeah.
there's no life, and I don't know exactly what that is, but it's something. I have pretty good intuition and EQ, but there's something there that I can't put my finger on, and I think that I don't want people to experience that because that means that someone has to go. But I think it's
Yeah.
important for people to understand those those different feelings because life is precious, and instead of doing harmful things and arguing, it's all about moving. Instead of like me versus you, this caveman,
Totally.
monkey,
Totally.
mammal fighting. It should be about how can us as a human civilization, Homo sapiens, all humans, all cultures, all races, move to a better, upgraded world and leave the next generation better than how you came to this planet. And I think in order for that to happen, there has to be some type of catastrophic event, or you have to see death, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that is that's definitely an important thing of life. With all the people that you've seen go, what were some of the patterns at the end of these people's lives, right when they're about to go, or maybe a couple of days, maybe a day before they go? What are some of the I guess you could say thought process that are going on in these people's heads? Obviously, it might be different, but when you know you're going to die, this is it. Some people might not know because they're on a lot of drugs, but when you know you're
Yeah.
going to die, how how have you seen humans react?
Um, I think that it depends. And I've had a lot of the patients that I've seen say that they've lived a really good life. And it was much more difficult for the people around them than it was for the person, because at that time, there seems to be a peacefulness about
Mm-hmm.
them. Um, the other thing that's striking is make amends with your family. There's not one patient that didn't want their family. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that there's a lot of discord that happens. Find the people you love and love them well, because at the end, that's who you're going to want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also people that you're friends with too, that you have close ties. I would agree.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, it's different. It's the room is not filled with friends at the end. And listen, friends are like family,
Mm-hmm.
but there is something about blood and having blood there for
Interesting. You
whatever
think that's
reason.
just like a primal genetic
I
component
don't
of
know.
humans?
I don't know, but again, I have seen a lot of people die, and I have seen a lot of people at the end of their life. Um, and those are the things that really have been very striking. It was that.
Well, well, I don't want to end this podcast on a bad note,
Yeah,
but
that's
how to
depressing.
I think it's important for people to
It
understand,
is. It
you have a lot
is.
of experience, and
Yeah.
life is temporary, and you want to appreciate it, upgrade the world. On
Yeah.
my 10 commandments, they're not religious commandments. It's actually
Yeah.
from Michael Saylor, the CEO and owner of MicroStrategies. He's big on Bitcoin. His 10 commandments, the last one was upgrade the world, and it was like guard your time, cultivate your friends, cultivate your environment,
Yeah.
stay cheerful, and also stay constructive, stuff like that, right? And the last thing was upgrade the world. So yeah, I think it's important for people to understand this. I think people really need to think more on a daily basis that life is temporary. We are floating in something that we have no idea what's going on. Even the smartest people in the world have no idea what's going on. So
Yeah.
I don't think we have or hold the correct neurons or enough neurons to understand what's going on. And I think that's not a bad thing. I think it's important because I think everyone has their role. Not everyone can be quarterback. So
That's right.
how do people reach out to you? How do people talk to you?
Yeah. Of
How does
course.
that look?
They can find me on my website, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. If you would like to be a patient, you can apply to be a patient there. We go and have an interview process. I have a great newsletter that goes out once a week, and it's like this interview will be in there. I choose papers. I choose things that I think are of value. I have a YouTube and podcast called the Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show. The YouTube is up. The podcast is coming soon. I'm obviously on Instagram and Twitter. And I would love to hear how you enjoyed this episode. And if you message me on IG, I do my very best to get back to everybody.
You heard it, guys. Reach out to her, blast away, ask her all the questions you have, reach out to her medical practice, and get her Cash App, whatever you guys have to do. And watch all her videos on YouTube. They're actually quite informative. Yeah, Gabrielle, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right, guys. That's the Justin Caviar Show, and we're out. Bye-bye, y'all.